We start with the perfect guest, the chair of the Congressional Black Caucus, Congressman Steve Horsford, Democrat of Nevada. Congressman, Mr. Chairman, we appreciate you being with us. Let's start with the Supreme Court's 6-3 ruling Thursday overturning race-based affirmative action in college admissions, and yesterday's ruling canceling President Biden's student debt relief plan, offering even modest relief to 40 million student borrowers. Black borrowers are disproportionately represented in that group. Chief Justice John Roberts claims these rulings are not political. And yet, in these two cases affecting Black Americans, we see the same 6-3 vote, with the three justices appointed by President Trump making up the core of the conservative majority. And I've been telling people all week long that said that we had nothing to vote for. Your vote is what gave Donald Trump the power to appoint a third of this sitting Supreme Court. 3 of the 9 justices are Trump. They only needed 2 more to go, and it's going to impact more than college students, because they can use this saying that using race as a criteria is unconstitutional, which is what they said. They can use that in contracts, employment, board seats. This has wide-ranging damage, potentially across the board, specifically starting with schools. What's your reaction to all of this, Mr. Chairman?
Well, first, thank you for having me on, Reverend Sharpton. Look, I want the minority dissent of Justice Ketanji Brown Jackson to be the majority opinion. Donald Trump asked Black people in 2016, what do you have to lose? Well, now we found out with this Supreme Court, this ultra-conservative, ideologically driven Supreme Court, what Black people have to lose. We have the fundamental rights around voting, around access to higher education, around elimination of student loan debt, around whether or not women are going to be able to have the ability to make their own decisions about their body. These are the decisions that this court has made in just the last year, as you noted. I'm here in New Orleans, the Congressional Black Caucus. We have 12 members of the CBC joining us for a Democracy for the People event. We are here at the historic Booker T. Washington High School, talking directly to constituents about the effects of these decisions, what they mean and what they don't mean, and what we as the people have to do to stand up to defend our democracy in this urgent moment.
And I remember just a couple of weeks ago, you announced that tour right on this show. We're glad to get you on the road, and we'll all ultimately be together in the culminating March on Washington, August 26th. But among the decisions this week that I actually applauded, another 6-3 decision, but this one not split along ideological lines, ruling that state legislators' power to control congressional elections was still subject to state courts and constitutions, voiding a fringe legal theory that state legislatures had an independent role in regulating federal elections. As a federal lawmaker in an election cycle, what kind of danger was the country facing in this decision had it gone the other way?
Yeah, the independent state legislature theory was something that literally was an attack on our democracy. It would have uprooted our ability to have consistent federal elections. And while the court did uphold the law, they didn't do anything to expand protections under the law. And Reverend Sharpton, you know, the Congressional Black Caucus and leaders, including yourself, are working hard to get the reauthorization of the Voting Rights Act passed. This is the first time in 40 years Republicans have not worked with Democrats to do that. We were also pleased with the decision that the court made to uphold Section 2 of the Voting Rights Act to ensure that there is equal representation in states like Alabama, Louisiana, where we are today, Georgia, to make sure that places that have high percentage of Black voters also have the ability and the opportunity to elect those individuals to federal office in Congress.
Now, I talked with President Biden at 30 Rockefeller Center in New York for about 15 to 20 minutes earlier this week. And like me, he was concerned about the High Court's decisions that we correctly feared were about to come down the very next day on affirmative action, and then the next day after that on the student debt loans. Still, I was heartened to see he was already looking forward to how he could and what he could do through executive authority to help the people that would suffer from this, and of course, what it would mean to next year's election. I talk a lot about what drives the base, whose base is more energized. And since Roe's reversal, Democrats have predicted that the abortion issue would drive women voters next year. I'd like to think that these rulings on affirmative action and student debt will do the same with black voters that polls show the president has lost some ground with. Do you see that happening, Congressman?
Yes, but we have to be intentional about making it happen. Look, the Supreme Court said that race could be used against a young black man in the course of profiling them in a case dealing with crime, but it cannot be used. Race cannot be used as a factor, as one factor in the admission of them into college. That is the egregious nature of this Supreme Court that has been stacked by the likes of former President Donald Trump and Senate Majority Leader Mitch McConnell, former Senate Majority Leader Mitch McConnell. But we have to be strategic. That's why the Congressional Black Caucus Institute is doing this National Summer of Action that will culminate at the 60th anniversary on the March on Washington in Washington, D.C. We're going directly to the people to strategize, to mobilize, and to organize. In fact, today, Reverend Sharpton, we kicked off our civic education training. We had a room filled with young black men talking about how they can lend their voice to these important issues around public safety, around food security, about issues around gun violence. These are the issues that people have to get involved with, because our democracy only works when the people demand that it works.
Now, one last question. In the midst of this Supreme Court decisions, California's legislature is now set to take up recommendations from the state's first in the nation task force on reparations. That task force turns in its final report to the state assembly Thursday. It included a model for cash payments and laid out who would be eligible. It's also included policy recommendations such as a formal state apology for disenfranchising black residents and a repeal of the state's affirmative action ban. While this is happening in the country's most populous state, there's been a renewed push by some House Democrats to take up the issue in Congress. If Democrats retake the House in a year, does that happen? And do we now face the threat of someone suing that, going to this court and overturning it if they overturn affirmative action, which is why voting becomes important?
It is absolutely why voting is important, why every election matters. And Reverend Sharpton, I want to underscore this point around affirmative action. Affirmative action still exists for the privileged, for those who benefit under legacy programs, people who are third-generation college students who get accepted because their parents were involved or they're a big contributor to the university. But it struck it down for race. But yet and still, we do not fund schools properly in this country. We don't have certified teachers in every classroom. We have issues with the pipeline of teachers and administrators that do not look like the students that they serve. And so this is what we talk about when we talk about equity. And it's from slavery to Jim Crow to the mass incarceration, but it's still to this very day the inequities that contribute to why we do have to have race-conscious policy that helps address these systemic issues that have plagued our country since its founding.
All right. Thank you for being with us, the chair of the Congressional Black Caucus, Congressman Stephen Horsford. Joining me